Do you think it's possible to have vivid dreams and they end up being true? Spooky story time. A coworker named Viv said that about 4 or 5 years ago, she was with this guy, and unfortunately, his dad had passed away. She never had the pleasure of meeting this man, but her boyfriend was always talking very well about him, always saying really nice things. And at this point, they had been together for about 2 years. And she says that one night she was asleep. She fell asleep as usual. And then she starts to have this dream. And her boyfriend's dad is in this dream. And she knows what he looks like and stuff like that because the family always showed her pictures. Her boyfriend always showed her pictures. They always talked about him. So she knew exactly what he looked like. So in this dream, his dad is walking up to her and talking to her. He puts his hand in his pocket and pulls this like bag out. And she's just standing there watching him. And he's showing her these little trinkets, these little things. She doesn't know what any of this means, but she's like, okay, like just random stuff. Then he pulls out this letter and he's reading it, but she doesn't remember exactly what it says. She remembered that he turned it around and at the bottom it said, "Go Lakers go," because that was their favorite team. And then it said, "Love Dad," or something like that. So she wakes up in the middle of the night coming out of this dream, and she wakes up her boyfriend and she's like, babe, oh my gosh, I just had a dream about your dad. And he's like, what? And she was so excited because it was so vivid. And she's like, do you think this means something? And she had no idea about any of anything. So she's telling him everything that she remembered, what he said. And then she starts talking about that bag that he pulled out with the trinkets. And he's looking at her like, then she proceeds to talk about the letter. And she talks about whatever she remembers. Then she specifically says the bottom of the letter said, "Go Lakers go." And it was at that point that her boyfriend just went pale. Like he was just, and he gets up and he just storms out of the room. And she thinks he's upset. Like, oh my God, what did I say? Like, oh my gosh, did I upset him because I'm talking about his dad? And he comes back with this box. It was things that belonged to his dad. She didn't get into specifics on what exactly was in there, but he pulls out this paper. He turns it around and shows it to her, and it's the letter that his dad had shown her in her dream. At the bottom of the letter, it says, "Go Lakers go, love Dad." And she's bawling. She's like, oh my gosh, like, no one had ever spoken to her about any of this. She had no idea that this letter even existed. And the trinkets that he was showing her were things that the family had put in the casket with him when they buried. There was no way that she could have known any of that. Oh my gosh, I just have the chills. I was shocked because, of course, I believe in stuff like that. Absolutely. Hello, I'm here, right? But for it to be this spot on is spooky. It's freaky. It is so nice, though, the fact that, I mean, this has to be a sign from his dad. Like, hey, I love you. I'm watching over you. Like, y'all are good. You know what I mean? Nonetheless, it's still spooky. But what do you guys think? And if you guys like all things spooky, all things scary, all things paranormal, and all things true crime, please make sure you follow. And if you have a spooky story that you want me to talk about, send it via DM or email. And also, happy Friday the 13th. Ignore all this baby drool because mom life.
This is a crazy, crazy, crazy glitch in the Matrix doppelganger story time. When I read this email, my mind sort of went to the Reddit lamp story in which the guy looks at the light and it looks a little weird and then he wakes up and he's in a different life. It's not the exact same, but that's just what I thought of when I read this email. So this came from someone named Colin, and he says that he grew up in southern Wisconsin, not a small town by any means. He grew up going to the same grade school and high school with like all the same people. So kind of a small town feel, even though it's not really a small town. But after college, he moves away. He ends up moving to the East Coast for a few years, but then moves back to southern Wisconsin because his mom got sick. His dad was sadly no longer around. He had no siblings, so it was pretty much just him and his mom. And Colin hadn't really stayed in touch with anybody that he had gone to like grade school or high school with. I mean, maybe some on social media, but like nobody that he was really close with. So when he moves back to this town, he doesn't really have a whole lot to do, and it's really just him hanging out at the house, reading a lot, and he was working remote, so the transition was relatively easy. He was single. real ties to the East Coast where he was living, but that's where he's just been for the last couple years. And after he moves back, this one night his mom tells him that she really wants pot roast, but she doesn't have the energy to cook, and he's like, I'll make you a pot roast. So he goes to the local grocery store. And while he's at the grocery store, he runs into this guy we'll call Adam, who he had gone to grade school with. And he kind of remembered Adam, but they weren't like ever really friends. But Adam recognizes him. He comes up to him in the grocery store and he's like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long. How have you been? And they start talking, and they're talking about school and people that they knew. Adam's like, do you remember all those weird experiments we had to do? Because apparently the two of them and some other kids that they went to school with were in the GATE program, which I've talked about a lot before, but the GATE program was called GATE because it was the Gifted and Talented Education Program. Apparently it was a government-funded program that was around primarily in like the 80s and 90s. I was in that program, but mine was in Illinois. But regardless, basically in this GATE program, kids had to do a bunch of weird experiments, and nobody really knows what those experiments were for. People remember having to drink a strange pink drink, which may have been a fluoride drink. I don't remember that. People also remember having to do sound exercises in which they would wear headphones and have to identify where beeping was coming from. Not hearing tests, something else entirely. I also remember learning Morse code and having to memorize pictures and predict what would be on the next page before it was shown to them. Regardless, all of that was just a little aside, so you understand what the GATE program was if you were unfamiliar. So this is the program that Adam and Colin were in together. And Adam asks Colin if he remembers being partners during some GATE program exercises. Colin's like, I haven't really thought about that since we were in school. Like, it's been a really long time. And he hadn't thought about it. But Adam starts saying, yeah, I've thought about it a lot as an adult and how strange those experiments were. And apparently when they were partners, they had to do this exercise in which they would go into separate rooms. They would essentially try to see in their mind's eye what the other one was doing in the separate room. So for example, Colin would be in room A and Adam would be in room B, and they would ask Colin, where is Adam in room B? Is he sitting in a chair? Is he sitting at a desk? Is he drawing? Is he at the chalkboard? What's he doing? They would switch roles, but this experiment was repeated over and over the course of a year. And apparently Adam and Colin were always partners. And so Adam's telling him about it, and it's bringing back all these memories for Colin. And he's like, yeah, I guess that was really weird. Like, what do you think they were doing? And Adam says, I think it was a remote viewing exercise. I think they were trying to see if we could remote view. Colin's like, yeah, I don't know. I've never really thought about it. And he said that it was a really weird exchange. And like after that, the energy just sort of shifted in the conversation. And he was just kind of like, okay, I want to get away from this guy because he sounds like he's just been in this town for too long. Has too much time to think, So they say their goodbyes. Adam and him exchange numbers. He's like, we should get a drink sometime. Colin's like, cool. It'll be cool to have a friend around here, So they exchange numbers. Colin gets all the stuff that he's got to get, and he leaves the grocery store. When he left the grocery store, he pulls out of the parking lot. He said it was dark out. It was probably around 8:30 p.m. His plan was to wake up the next morning, start the pot roast, and have it cook all day, okay? So he pulls out of the grocery store, he stops at a light. There's no other cars around, but there is a street light just past the stoplight. And he said there was a distinct moment when he noticed the street light because it blinked, and he thought to himself, they have to change that bulb. As he's having that thought, another car pulls up next to him in the turn lane directly to his right. So he looks at it, and he notices it's a gray Toyota 4Runner, and he knows it's a gray Toyota 4Runner because he drives a gray Toyota 4Runner. As he's having that thought, he notices the driver, who looks exactly like him, and he thinks, wow, that's so strange. This guy is exactly me, except for he has a different haircut. And then the guy turns to look at him, and this guy looks shocked, appalled, scared even. As they're making eye contact, Colin is like, this guy is my twin. I've never seen anyone else who looks so much like me, except this guy looks like he's maybe a couple years older. He has more wrinkles, but they're just staring at each other. And he was like, the look of horror on this guy's face is what shocked me the most about the whole exchange. Not even that he looks so much like me. Guy looks like he's seen a ghost, and that really rattled Colin more than anything. But the light turns, the guy makes a right, and Colin continues on his way home. Doesn't really think about it too much other than the fact that, I guess I have a twin that's living in this town that I've never seen before. Life continues on. Colin's living in this town for a few months. His mom is making small progress with her illness. She's not super sick anymore, and he feels like he's helping. Even goes out with Adam a couple times, and they don't really talk about anything weird. Adam's just like a normal guy friend. So now at least he has a friend in this town. And also during this period, Colin is into going to the library. He's reading a lot. And so he'll go there on his days off or on the weekends and just check out some books and just kind of walk around just to get out of the house. And this one day he's there, he notices this woman, and she's pretty. She has short brunette hair. She's got glasses on. She looks like maybe she's intellectual. She's looking through some stacks of books, and he notices more than anything about her, more than her looks or anything, is that she's wearing this band hoodie that he really liked. And he said it was a band that was regionally popular when he was in college, but never really made it nationally. So he was impressed that she had the same music taste as him. And he was thinking should I shoot my shot? But she looks up at him, she smiles at him, and he just loses all his confidence, and he decides he's not going to do anything because he doesn't even know how long he's going to be living in this town. So he doesn't actually end up talking to her. But then he sees her again out one night when he's out with Adam. They're at a local restaurant. They're sitting at the bar. She's sitting at the bar a few seats down. She smiles at him again, and he's like, does she recognize me from the library? But he doesn't talk to her. A couple weeks later, he's at the same grocery store that he initially ran into Adam, and this woman is there. And this time, she walks up to him and she goes, we have to stop meeting like this. So he's like, okay, she recognizes me. He laughs because he thinks it's cute, and they start talking, and he's like, are you from here? Like, I don't know you. I just moved back. And they do the whole pleasantry thing. And she basically tells him, no, I moved here because I'm a graduate student at the local university. He asks her what she's studying. She says physics. She just moved to the town a year ago. She just started the program, and she doesn't really know anyone besides the people that she's in school with. Exchange numbers. They end up going on a date. They hit it off. They start dating. During the period they're dating, she comes over. She meets Colin's mom. Colin's mom really likes her. She pulls Colin aside after this girl leaves, and she basically tells him, like, oh my gosh, this might be the one for you. 2 months go by, he's caught up in this new romance, and he realizes that he's kind of blown Adam off a little bit because Adam's asked him to hang out a bunch of times, and he has always declined because he's been with her. And finally one night, Adam's like, oh, come on, man, like we haven't caught up in however long. And so Colin's like, okay, well, I'm gonna bring her. Is that cool? And Adam's like, yeah, of course, like, love to meet her, bring her to the bar. So they end up going to the bar to meet Adam. And as they're sitting there talking, her and Adam are getting to know each other. She ends up saying to both of them, wow, you guys really seem to have this really strong connection. Colin thought that was weird because he was like, obviously Adam was my friend, but we weren't like super close. Like, I had just reconnected with this guy. But he thought maybe she was just saying it to like be nice or to like compliment their friendship or something. So whatever. They all leave the bar. Later that night, Adam texts him and he was like, man, I just have to tell you, like, something is off about her. But Colin's like, that's a really weird thing to say. Like, that's inappropriate. I really like her. She's been really nice to you. Like, why are you saying this? And Adam's like, I don't know. I just felt like I had to tell you that. He's like, I don't know, she's pretty and all, but I'm just saying if I met her, I wouldn't trust her. And that sort of drove a wedge between Colin and Adam's like newfound friendship because Colin just thought it was rude. About a month after that, Colin's mom got some really good news about her diagnosis, and Colin's like, cool, that's amazing. We should go out and celebrate. I'll bring my girlfriend, And his mom's like, I don't really feel like going out. Why don't we all just cook here and we'll stay in and just play board games? It'll be really fun. And Colin's like, cool. So him and his new girlfriend decide that they're going to cook for her. So he calls his girlfriend. He's like, let's go to the grocery store. We're going to get a bunch of food. We're going to make a bunch of food. And then this is the plan. They go to, you guessed it, the same grocery store. And as they're leaving the grocery store, they're at the light. And Colin has not thought about that night that he saw the man that looked like him that was a little bit older. But as they're sitting at that light, headed home, she looks at him and she says, this intersection gives me very strange vibes. Have you ever seen anything weird here? The question catches him off guard because he's like, why would she ask me that? And so he decides he's going to tell her about that night. He's like, yeah, actually, right when I first kind of was staying here, the night that I met Adam, I saw this man who looked exactly like me. She goes, well, do you think it was you? And he was like, do I think it was me? No, I just think it was a guy that looks like me that lives in this town. She goes, well, what do you think that man was thinking when he saw you? And Colin's like, I don't know. I think he probably thought it was just as weird that he had a twin floating around this town that he had never seen before. And she just goes, I don't know. And then she looks at the street light and she goes, these lights here don't look right either. Colin said that really weirded him out too because he had not even told her about the light flickering before he saw that man. They get back to his mom's house. They cook dinner. Everything is going as it should. They're playing board games. They have an amazing night. And that's why it was weird because the next day she basically ghosted him. All of a sudden, she starts telling him that she's really busy with school. She doesn't have time. She's got to work on a bunch of projects. Basically just giving him the cold shoulder. And up until that point, she had been completely like green light, like, let's hang out all the time. Let's do whatever. I want to meet all your friends and family. Colin said it really messed with his head because he really liked her. He thought things were going well, but obviously it wasn't like a super serious relationship. Like, they had only been dating for a few months. But regardless, she ends up breaking up with him fully about a month after that. Never really gave him any explanation besides, it's not you, it's me. He doesn't see her again, okay? About a year later, he ends up moving out of the town. His mom was doing better. He was back to the East Coast. But last year, his mom sadly passes away from something unrelated. He has to go back to the town to clean out her house, put her house up for sale, do all of the things. Really sad time in his life, obviously. As he's at the house cleaning up, he decides he's going to go to the grocery store, get some stuff so that he can just kind of like put his head down and clean out the house over the next week or two. It's like 8 o'clock at night, goes to the store, gets all his stuff, headed out of the store, pulls up to the intersection. There's a car in front of him at the intersection. Notices it's a silver Toyota 4Runner, and all of a sudden all of those memories come back and he starts getting freaked out. He's like, what are the chances this happens again? I wonder if it's the same guy. And as he's having that thought, the light flickers. He's like, there's no way, I have to know. So he pulls up in the turn lane next to this silver Toyota 4Runner. Looks over at the driver. The driver's already looking at him and he is shocked. He's appalled because it is him. He said the guy was wearing the same green beanie. He turns right. He said, I had to get out of there. I didn't know what to do. Never saw the guy again. He says, maybe it was just coincidence, but part of me thinks it wasn't.
So for the story that I'm going to tell tonight, I have to give a massive trigger warning. I'm serious. If you cannot handle bad things, don't watch this. In 2011, when Olivia was 10 years old, her and her family moved into a house in Manchester. It was her, her mother, her father, and her 2 sisters. Now, it was a pretty big house, and it was an ordinary house, but the story behind it was not ordinary. In 1991, an elderly woman and her husband lived in that house. Now, this couple unfortunately had neighbors, and these neighbors did not like them because they didn't look like them. So one day, those neighbors went to the couple's house and ended up burning the house down. The couple was inside of it, and so the couple did not make it. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happened. Okay, I'm really tired, you guys. You're going to have to bear with me. I get really emotional when I get tired. I'm really tired. So I'm not going to tell you what happened after they burnt the house down because they went inside of the house and they did something to the couple. But I cannot bring myself to say it. So a couple years later, the house is rebuilt and there's a rumor that's going around that the elderly couple haunts the house. So nothing happened for a year that they lived there until about 2012. 2012 comes around and her sister starts having these dreams, and they're horrible dreams. And she said that there's an elderly couple in these dreams. Now, these dreams would go on for weeks until weird stuff started happening in the house. One day, her mother is walking down the stairs, and as she's walking down the stairs, she feels something shove her, and she falls down the stairs and she ends up breaking her leg. Now, during this time, her mother just told her and her sister that it was an accident and that she had tripped down the stairs, but she knew that she didn't trip down the stairs. Now, her sister's dreams would continue, but then it would turn into sleep paralysis, and this sleep paralysis terrified her sister. One night, her sister goes to bed, she falls asleep, and she wakes up in the middle of the night, and she thinks it's around midnight, and she realizes that she can't move, she can only see, and she's looking around her room, and she looks at the end of her bed, and she sees an elderly woman standing at the end of her bed, just smiling at her. Now, her sister tells her parents about this because she is terrified, but her parents don't believe her for some reason, even though her mom was pushed down the stairs. Well, a little bit of time goes by and her father starts getting pushed. He'll be sitting on the couch randomly when suddenly something will physically push him off the couch. And he said that it wasn't even like a push, it was more like a shove. Her and her sister liked to play outside a lot, and they had a medium-sized farm, so they had a few cows, a few goats, and her father would normally care for them, and they would sometimes play in the cows' fields. So one day, her and her sister are playing out in the cows' fields while her father is feeding the cows and cleaning the barn. While her father is doing this, they're outside playing catch. They're playing catch with a ball. They're throwing it back and forth. And as they're throwing it back and forth, Olivia goes to throw the ball to her sister, and she misses it, and it rolls away. The ball is rolling, and it stops, and her sister goes to grab it, and the ball moves again, and it rolls for another 5 seconds, and she goes to grab it again, and it rolls again. So her sister is like, what? And Olivia's kind of looking at it like, what is going on? After a couple of seconds, her sister finally gets the ball, so she grabs the ball, and she turns around, and she goes and throws it back to Olivia. As soon as Olivia catches the ball, she hears this giggle at the side of her ear, but she at first is like, is it my other sister? And then she thinks to herself, my sister doesn't giggle like that. For some reason, she did not want to look in that direction. So she decides that she's going to ignore it. Now, at this point, they decide that they're going to take a break and they're going to go lay in the fields and just talk. So as they're laying in the field, Olivia turns her head because she wants to see what her father is doing in the barn. So when she looks over at the barn, her father isn't there. And she thinks this is really weird because every time that they were playing outside while her father was in the barn, he would tell them if he was going back inside. And also, she was facing towards the house, so she would have seen him walk back inside. She decides to ignore this because she thinks that maybe somehow he just got past her and she didn't see it. So they're laying there for a couple more minutes and she turns to look at the barn again and her father still isn't there. At this point, they decide that they want to go back inside. So they both get up and they walk back inside. When they get back inside, her father is sitting at the kitchen table. And so she asks him, why didn't you tell us that you were going back inside? And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you were in the barn. Why didn't you tell us that you were going back inside? And he was like, I was never in the barn. She said at this point, she got chills, actual chills that just ran down her spine because what she saw her father in that barn. She know it was same clothes, same everything. Whatever was in that barn looked exactly like her father. So she tells her father this, but when she tells him this, he gives her this horrified look. And she's really confused by this. She's like, why is he looking at me like this? So she asks him, are you okay? What's wrong? And all he says is, do not play in that field again. And so they're both like, okay. And they agree not to. But at this point, she is like, what is my father not telling me? Something really scared him. About a week goes by and her father tells them that he's going to go out in the barn. And when he goes out there, he tells them not to follow him. He tells them that it's because the cows are being very aggressive that day. But she knows that that is not the reason why. She knows that whatever is the reason, it's because of what he was scared about the week before. As her dad goes out in the barn, her and her sister decide that they're going to go on the couch and they're going to watch cartoons. And so they do that for about 30 minutes. About 30 minutes goes by and her mom calls them in for dinner. They walk into the kitchen and her dad's not in the kitchen. And so she's like, hey mom, where's dad? And she's like, oh, he's working out in the barn. Let me go get him. Wait here. Her mother goes outside and she can hear her mother calling her father, like to come back inside. And then she can't hear her anymore. And about 10 minutes goes by and her mother walks back inside and she has this very worried look on her face. But her mother's kind of trying to hide it with a smile. And she just says to them, he probably went out with Joe. Apparently Joe was her father's best friend and they would go get coffee a lot. So they all sit down and they eat dinner when suddenly Olivia feels something poke her arm, like something is trying to get her attention. Olivia tells her mom about this and she said that the look on her mom's face when she told her that was just a pure worry. So at this point, Olivia is like, what is going on? After she tells her mom this and her mom looks all worried, her mom just goes, go upstairs, go to bed or do something. Well, a few hours pass and her sister are upstairs playing with their toys, and there's still no sign of her father. And she can hear her mother downstairs calling her father. She's calling him on the phone now, and it's just going to voicemail each time. So soon after this, she tells them to go to bed. It's already 10 p.m. at this point, and so they get themselves ready for bed and they go to sleep. Okay, trigger warning again. So 2 a.m. rolls around and she wakes up because she hears someone shouting outside. So she gets up and she crawls like out of her bed and she goes over to the window and she peeks out the window and she sees 4 men in white robes. They're walking around in circles behind each other and they're chanting something with torches in their hands. So she couldn't make out what they were chanting, but she's just sitting there for about 2 minutes, absolutely horrified, looking out the window, staring at these men, when suddenly one of them looks over at her, makes direct eye contact with her, and they just stop chanting. When suddenly another one of them turns around, looks at her, points at her, and shouts something. She gets so scared at this point that she just darts back in her bed. She tries to fall asleep, but she can't fall asleep for another 2 hours. Okay, trigger warning again. This one is really bad. Well, morning rolls around and her sister get out of bed and they go downstairs and her mother is bawling her eyes out. So her and her sister are like, what is wrong? What is going on? And her mother tells them to sit down on the couch. So they go to sit down and they're just waiting for her to tell them what she's gonna say. Olivia said that she will never forget these words. And other words that I cannot say, she says, your father is not here with us anymore. I found him this morning. So her and her sister just start crying because their kids and their father's gone, right? She then said that her mother told her something that will sit in the back of her head for the rest of her life. I have to show you with my hands what happened. I can't tell you. So he was found with a branch like this, and he was found like this. And someone had also the sides of his mouth. So the police do an investigation and they find out that what most likely happened, because they never found out who did it, what looks like happened is that he was by what rhymes with a bolt. She said that they moved shortly after this, and she ended the email there, but she didn't really explain much detail further. What I find so awful about this story is just about everything. It was so hard for me to tell, so hard for me to read, but like sometimes I feel like these stories are really important to tell, because how I look at it is she needed to get her story out there, or she wouldn't have emailed me. But what I want to know, and what I think she wants to know, is what you guys think about this story. I mean, there's a lot of paranormal aspects to it. And then there was that, you know, was anything connected? Like, this is wild. I don't have much time for any commentary or shout outs. I'm so sorry, you guys. But just leave your thoughts, suggestions, and anything else you need to say in the comments. But with this one, you need to be respectful. Props to people who cover true crime, because I was asked to be the face of a true crime show recently. And I did the research for it. And I started the video. And I was like, I can't do this. I had to reach out to them a couple days ago. And I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. This is gonna ruin my life if I do this. I cannot handle it. Especially because they were asking me to do stories that covered kids, and I don't know why I did this to myself. I started researching it, and I'm telling you right now, it almost, like, it took me out. I was not okay for like a week. That's part of the reason why this story was so hard for me to tell, because the beginning is sickening. That shit sickens me. And then the end, where they had to find out that their father was gone. Like, I can't imagine having to tell your child that, and then being a child and having to go through that. And I know I cry a lot. With this stuff, I can't help it. I would have been filming for 5 hours if I would have cut that out. So I'm going to be responding to all of your comments tomorrow. I'm going to do 2 videos at a time to catch up, like, each day. So just so you know, I will be doing that. Sorry about the shout outs, guys. Keep sending me your scary stories. Have a safe night. Have a spooky night, and I love you.
Let's read some creepy Home Alone stories. At the time, I was living in the basement of my boyfriend's parents' house. He had lived in that basement for years and always told me about shadows moving quickly across corners and walls and other unsettling things happening. I always thought he was exaggerating. It was in the middle of a weekday, and I was the only one home. I was cleaning and doing laundry. I had a radio plugged in playing a local station, and their dog was in the basement with me. I was bending over to pick up another piece of laundry to fold when I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye shoot across a dark corner of the hallway. I figured it was just my mind playing with me. I went back to folding. Suddenly, the lights flickered on and off, and the radio flickered in and out, then turned to static for a few seconds before going silent. At the exact same time, the dog's hair stood on end, and she ran, tail tucked, up the stairs. I called her to come back, but she stood at the top of the stairs, barking frantically, refusing to come down. I believed my boyfriend after that. Yeah, if you tell me your basement is haunted, don't worry about me. I am not going down there. When my wife left for work at 9 p.m., I called my friends and told them to get their asses on the game. We played until 2 a.m., but we would have played more if it weren't for the events that happened this night. My headphones were at maximum volume, so I could barely hear anything. I had my dog beside me and felt really safe. What was most unsettling, though, was that my PC was positioned away from any windows and doors, so I couldn't see anything behind me. Thankfully, I had the bright idea of giving my dog treats just for the company. He would always go away if I had no treats or when he felt like it, so I kept a bag close. At around 2:10, I was thinking of getting off but continued to play. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my dog springs up from his bed and starts going full-on berserk mode. I took my headphones off and looked behind me, and I saw 2 eyes staring at me through the window. What was most scary was I could only see the eyes and nothing else. I jumped up in fear and grabbed a kitchen knife and called my wife. After she came back home, we searched for any signs of the intruder still being here. We called the police too. They didn't find anything. We've moved since that day. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off at around 3 p.m., and my parents would be home around 4:30. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even be dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. Today it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. No one should have been here until like 7 p.m. My house is set up to where my upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So, with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. No one I know drives a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends or someone my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door, then another. I go to my other window that has a better view of the walkway up to my front door. I see the guy walking back down the walkway. I switch and go back to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I'm relaying all of this to Seth, still with my mic on. I tell Seth that he's walking back to his truck now. Instead, he walks past his truck and tries to open my garage side door. At this point, my heart sinks. I tell Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house. Mind you, it is literally broad day at like 5 p.m. Luckily, it was locked because sometimes we forget to lock it. After he tried the door, he starts walking to my back patio. I drop my headset and I quietly run downstairs to see what he is doing. I get downstairs and stand behind the wall, so I'm not visible from the back door/living room windows. I just listen. I hear him try to open the door, then I hear a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I'm more scared than I've ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in my house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross my living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went in there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I'm telling him this, I hear a car door shut. This time, when I look out the window, he finally got in his truck. I looked at the truck closer, and I noticed the only thing he has in his truck bed was a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate. He was parked to where I couldn't see. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I get to the back door and see that the doormat was moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key. Holy fuck. We have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch and all the pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I would have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. See, this is why I will never have a spare key to my house outside of my house. That's insane.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me tell you guys a story time of this girl from my neighborhood who dated this guy who had money, and she thought this guy was the one for her until she got pregnant and stayed pregnant for a good 11 months straight. So for story's sake, we're gonna call this girl Nikki, okay? So Nikki was somebody that moved into the neighborhood like a couple of years ago. Like, we didn't necessarily grow up with her, but she moved here with her mother, her brother, I think, and that was it. And at some point after high school, after she finished high school, she started dating this guy, y'all, who treated her right. He used to buy her flowers, take her out, do this, do that. You understand? And there was this guy who knew Nikki's boyfriend in real time, and he would always say him and this guy are not friends anymore because this guy does weird things. And he would always be like, Nikki, ask your boyfriend what he does for a living, and whatever he tells you, ask him to explain it, because something is off with that guy, I'm telling you. And you know, we obviously looked at Mr. Man like he was jealous, because what are you talking about? And also, this person used to be your friend, so obviously you're gonna badmouth them because they are, you know, at a better level than you. So we thought. So I used to be cool with Nikki's brother, and you know, from time to time, Nikki's brother is, you know, part of the LGBTQIA, by the way. So whenever we would be chilling, it would be me, the brother, and also Nikki, right? And we would be talking, and she'd be telling us about her boyfriend. And what's crazy is Nikki used to be like, you guys should date guys that like appreciate you guys, date guys with money, don't date a broke guy, broke guys this, broke guys that. You know, she was just always telling us that we should go for guys with money and all of that. And the problem is she never told us the consequences, you know? So this guy Moss one day decides, I'm going to do right by Nikki, and he sends people to Nikki's ballsy, obviously to Lobola, you know, to pay dowry and all of that. And it was cute. How few weeks after that, Nikki is pregnant. Oh wow. But guys, this guy sent people to pay dowry for Nikki, but Nikki was still staying at her house. That should have been red flag number one. He refused for Nikki to go stay at his house, right? Which was kind of weird, but we were just like, you know what, I don't know. He made excuses like, oh, you know, I have work, you know, you can't be in the house alone. Nikki fell pregnant. You know, we're happy, but months are going by. She, number one, was not feeling symptoms. Every single time she'd go to the sauna, they would tell her that they don't see anything, but they hear a heartbeat. You know, there is something in the stomach, but you know, it looks like it's a child, but they're not sure. Nikki decides to mice, because obviously her boyfriend is in there, in her ear on some, don't worry, don't stress, let's not go to the doctor, let's not, it's going to be fine. You know, these doctors are just trying to stress you, they're saying things, you know, he's just making sure that she doesn't go further to investigate. You get? 2 months go by, 3 months go by, 4 months go by, 7 months go by, 8 months go by, 9 months go by, and she goes to the hospital because, you know, her due date is past, you know, has passed by like a week. She goes to the hospital and they put her under the sauna and they see nothing. So the doctor's like, I know what's going on. So they tell her that we need to induce labor, you know. She calls the husband, I guess, and she's like, hey, they say that they need to induce labor here, something is wrong, blah blah blah. Boyfriend is like, no baby, don't let them do that, you know, come home, let's talk about it first. She's like, I chilled. That little weasels this into this girl's ear and lies to her and says, no, it's gonna be fine, let's wait a little bit. They waited a little bit. 10 months go by, 11 months go by. At this point, baby girl is going through it. She can't walk anymore. Her feet are always swollen. We are always massaging her feet. She always tells us that her back is hurting. And she always used to tell us that, this freaking belly is heavy as hell. And you know how pregnant people will tell you, like people that have been pregnant before will tell you that, oh no, the baby's heavy or whatever. And when she told people that, I'm actually 11 months, people will be like, wait, what? Like, that's not supposed to happen. Go to the hospital, bruh. But the boyfriend is refusing, Eventually her mom is like, no, sissy, we need to go and like check what's going on. And the sister refuses. Nikki refuses to go to Sisa to go and consult. So the mom goes and she takes me and the brother as well. And I'm just like, see, because I want to go here. When we get there, she asked us to accompany her or whatever. When we get there, we were literally sitting outside, but I was sitting by the window so I could hear everything that this person was saying. This person tells Nikki's mom that Nikki is literally about to give birth, and she's going to give birth, and when she gives birth to a new life, another life is going to be taken. So the mom is like, wait, what do you mean? The guy keeps on saying that he really can't explain it, but when a new life comes to the earth, another life is going to be taken. And he eventually tells Nikki's mom that Nikki is not necessarily pregnant with a child, The boyfriend knows exactly what he was doing when he came to pay dowry. Next thing, she's pregnant. He knows exactly. The guy said that Nikki's husband, boyfriend, whatever you'd like to call it, has a person that he goes to. And this person basically can read minds based off of behavior. Like, once you sleep with this guy, automatically your soul or whatever gets taken by that guy, and he takes it, he puts it in a bottle, and the person that are you guys checking with me? The person that he goes to see, the witch doctor that he goes to see that helps him gain this wealth, is the one that basically controls you, right? And he can tell. So when they have this thing in a bottle, they basically can control your thoughts. They know how you think. They know what to do with you. So that's why Nikki has been refusing to either go to the doctor, and she only listens to this guy. So he's like, Nikki is not pregnant with a real thing. Like, you guys need to take Nikki and bring her here so that we can perform a safe delivery and remove whatever is in her. Okay, go back home. Nikki's mom tries to convince her, talks to her and says, Nikki, something is wrong. Nikki's like, no, my boyfriend would never do that, blah, blah, blah. The mom is like, Nikki, please, bruh, let's go. Boyfriend was 10 steps ahead. Boyfriend eventually is like, listen, Nikki, I went to talk to somebody. They said you should go to the doctor to give birth. So, okay, Nikki's like, I bet. She goes to the hospital, y'all, and they induce labor. And they tell Nikki to push. Nikki keeps on pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And number one, blood was coming out. Nothing but blood was coming out. Like, it was so much blood that was coming out. Eventually they realized that, no, like, nah, something is going on here. Something is really wrong. And eventually they decide to stop and tell her to stop pushing, and she tells them that she's in so much pain because Nikki's mom and brother were there. So the brother was the one that was narrating the story to me. She says she's in so much pain. They eventually let it go, and I don't know what happened. They had an operation, and immediately after they stopped the pushing, she started breathing heavily, and she was like, yeah, she feels like some sort of thing has come out of her, and her stomach went from, you know that pregnant people's stomachs, how it looks, and then it just went down, and she had a flat stomach. It did look like she was pregnant, but like, it just went down. And now doctors can't explain what's happening. She eventually needs a blood transfusion. She goes to get the blood and gets a blood transfusion, and she gets better, and the doctors did tell the mom that, there was a, like, black doctors know, they know ball. So they were like, do you guys believe in witchcraft and all of that? And they were like, after Nikki pushed the baby out, a snake, man, was slithering, around the operation room, and they like looked and looked and looked, and there was nada. Like, they looked for the snake and there was nada. Even after they had removed Nikki from the room, they went back and cleaned, like deep cleaned, and the snake was not there. So they don't know what happened, so they're just saying go consult, don't just rely on, Nikki got better, and she left the hospital 3 weeks after with no baby, no explanation of what happened because the doctors don't know either. And when she got home, she was never the same after that. She was not okay, y'all. She was not okay. And the boyfriend, nowhere to be found. Boyfriend bought himself a new car that week, and a very expensive cars, the ones that you buy that are like in the millions. He bought himself a car, he bought a second house. We don't know what happened. So when when Nikki's mom went to go consult, she found out that Nikki's boyfriend obviously had put a snake inside her, and whatever snake that she was pregnant with was supposed to give her wealth. And he basically goes around and does this. And guess what? A week after that, we tried to help Nikki, and she was just always bleeding. We take her back to the hospital, and she lost the battle, guys. She lost her life. That's that.
What? There was this man named Wally. Now, Wally grew up on the Navajo reservation, and he said his grandfather was an elder. Well, this one particular night, him and his brother spent the night at their grandfather's house. And he said late at night, these men from the community ran inside his grandfather's house. And they seemed very agitated and upset. They started telling his grandfather, it's out in the truck. We caught one. We finally got one. Like, it's out there. You need to come outside. So he said his grandfather and these men, they went outside to this truck. He proceeded to sneak out of the window in his bedroom and go around to the side of the house. He said he watched these men pull this cage out of the back of the truck, and inside the cage was this coyote. They took the coyote around to the back of the house, and he said they tied this thing up and they started to hit it. Now, Wally was kind of like, why is my grandfather hurting this animal? Like, why would he do this? But soon he started to realize this coyote was speaking human words, and it was yelling, it was cussing, it was fighting with these men. And he said as he moved a little closer and got a better look at this coyote, it wasn't a normal coyote. It had hands and feet like a man, but the body of a coyote. He said some kind of tussle broke out, and they started fighting with this thing. He said the next thing he sees is this thing turned into a man, and it was unclothed, and it took off running into the desert. And his grandfather and these men chased after it. Well, the next day, he said his grandfather was very ill. In the next couple weeks, his grandfather grew worse and worse, and eventually passed away. But he always felt whatever happened to his grandfather had something to do with that coyote. Now, there was this other man named Cal. Cal said that when he was younger, his father had passed away. And he had left him this vacation home. And he said this cabin sat up in the mountains of northern New Mexico, near the San Luis Valley. And he said, at the time, he didn't know what to do with it. So he talked to a realtor, and they agreed to sell this place. Well, there was about a month's time before this place was to be sold that he still owned it. So he decided, I'm going to spend a week there and kind of, be close to my father and say my last words or whatever. So he takes his dog and he packs his stuff and he gets in his truck and he drives up to this cabin. We said the first 2 days it was uneventful. He had a pretty good time. But the third day, that's when things started to get weird. He said in the morning, he noticed in the snow there were all of these footprints. They looked like a very, very large dog or wolf or something. But those tracks eventually went from being dog-like to human-like. And he couldn't figure out how these dog prints turned into human footprints. So later that night, he's in bed, His dog's at his side. And he said the dog started to go crazy. And it ran for the front door. And it started barking like there was something out there. The dog then came back in the bedroom and alerted him to saying, something is outside. So he gets up, he goes to the front door, and when he opens the door, this dog runs out onto the porch, and it just starts barking at the woods. And as he steps out the doorway, he looks over into the wood line, and he sees a figure of something, and it's moving. And out of the woods steps his father. And he looked exactly how he remembered him. He was wearing the same exact flannel shirt and flannel hat. And he had the same mustache, and he looked vigorous and full of life. We said his father began to speak to him, saying, son, I've missed you. Like, it's so good to see you. Like, I'm so happy you're here. And that's when Cal said, you're not my father. Like, you are not my father. And he goes, what do you mean? You don't recognize your father? I am your father. And Cal goes, no, you are not my father. I buried him months ago. And he said, no, I am your father. Like, I love you. Come here. And he started to move closer towards Cal. Well, Cal was like, no, you are not my father. You need to leave. And he said that's when this man that looked like his father said, you're not going to come here and give your father a hug? And then he got this big smirk on his face. And that's when Cal knew something was wrong. He grabs the dog, drags him inside, and he slams the door shut. Well, he goes around to the windows and he closes all the curtains and he locks himself in the bedroom. Now, he can hear this thing outside the cabin, tapping on the window, scratching at the door, trying to get inside. This went on for about 20 to 30 minutes. Eventually, it got quiet. And he thought perhaps it had left. So he goes out of the bedroom and he goes into the living room. He said right at that moment, he hears this loud thump up on the roof. And he can hear these footsteps. Something was moving around on the roof. And the next thing he knows, he looks over at the fireplace and he sees the soot falling down. It was trying to get in from the chimney. And he can hear it clawing and scraping, trying to come down the chimney. So he grabs some kerosene, he throws it on the fireplace, and he starts it on fire. And as this fire rose up through the chimney, he begins to hear this thing scream. And he said it was the worst sound he had ever heard. It then jumped off the house and it took off into the woods. And to this day, he never will go back to that place.
Let's read another true and scary story. The name it spelled wasn't random. I don't believe in Ouija boards, or at least I didn't. It was last summer at my friend Mia's house. There were 4 of us, bored, scrolling on our phones, and her older sister brought out this dusty board she'd found at a charity shop. None of us took it seriously. We were laughing, making jokes about horror movies, putting our fingers on the planchette like it was a game. At first, nothing happened. Then it started moving. Slowly, like someone was barely pushing it. We all accused each other, swore we weren't doing it, the usual. It spelled nonsense for a while, random letters, things that didn't make sense. Then Mia asked, half joking, "Who are you?" The planchette slid to M, then A, then R. I felt my stomach drop because that's my dad's name, Mark. I didn't say anything. I told my friend it was a coincidence. It kept going. K. Mia laughed and said, "Okay, which one of you is doing that?" No one answered. I asked a question I wish I hadn't. "Do you know us?" It moved straight to yes. The room went quiet in that comfortable way where everyone suddenly wants to stop, but no one wants to be the first to admit it. I remember my hand felt cold, like all the warmth had drained out of my fingers. Then the planchette moved without a question. H-A-L-L. Mia read it out loud. Hall? What hall? I thought about the hallway at my house, the one where the lights always flicker even after we change the bulb. I didn't tell them that. We ended the game after that, said goodbye like you're supposed to, put the board back in the box. The mood was weird, but we brushed it off and watched a film instead. When my mom picked me up, she told me Dad had fallen earlier that evening, slipped in the hall and hurt his wrist. He was fine, just shaken. Maybe it was a coincidence. Probably was, but I haven't touched a Ouija board since, and I still hate sitting with my back to any hallway door. Thank you so much, Fatima, for sending this one in. I think that a common belief about Ouija boards is that, people will subconsciously move the planchette without even realizing that they're doing it. But in a case like this, where it spelled out your dad's name and it also spelled out hall, when that same day, later in the day, he slipped and fell in the hallway, you wouldn't have known to subconsciously write out his name and hall. I wonder almost you were communicating with another version of your dad, in a parallel universe where he did slip in the hall and really, really did injure himself. But it's really interesting. I've never heard of a case where a Ouija board was used to communicate with someone who is still on Earth. But I am glad that your dad is okay, and thank you so much for signing this one in. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
This story comes out of the Roanoke Valley region of Virginia. There was this family from New York who had lived in the city most of their life. They wanted to get away and, live that remote urban life. So they find this beautiful home on 16 acres in this secluded area of the Roanoke Valley in the Appalachian Mountains. And their first day moving in, the father, he notices something weird. The neighbor actually comes not to greet them, not to welcome them to the area, but to warn them. And he says very specifically, at night, make sure you lock your doors and your windows and you close curtains. And he says, very important, there is something out there. And he goes, you mean the people in this area are really like that you have to lock your doors? And he goes, I'm not talking about people. It's something else. But that's all I'm going to say. Now just remember, lock your doors and your windows at night. You'll be all right. So the neighbor leaves. Well, the father kind of just shakes it off and is like, okay, whatever. So they live there for several months, and they really enjoy their new life. Well, this one particular night, the family is sitting in the living room and they have a fire going. That's when the father notices that the son is standing next to the window and he's staring at something very intently. And so he asks the son, what are you staring at? What's out there? And he goes, Father, there's a boy out there. There's this young boy. Can I go and play with him? And the father's like, what are you talking about? There's no boy around here. We live in the woods. There's no one around here. And he's like, no, Father, there's a boy out there. There's a boy out there. And the father's like, you know what? It's time for bed. Go to bed. And he doesn't really think anything of it. Over the next couple of weeks, the son keeps looking out the window at something and telling his father, there's this boy outside. And he keeps drawing pictures of this boy. And he keeps saying, I really want to play with that boy. The father at the time just thinks, this is something to do with him moving and his active imagination. Until one night, the whole family is asleep. When the father wakes to a sound coming from the living room, he gets his wife up and he's like, I think someone's in the house. I think someone's broken in. Go and get the children, make sure they're safe. So he gets up, he goes down the hallway very slowly. And when he gets to the living room and he flips on the light, there's his son on the floor playing with his toys. And the front door is wide open. So he asks the son, what are you doing up? Why are you out of bed? And he goes, Father, I'm playing with the boy. And he goes, what boy? What are you talking about? And he said, the boy, he came inside and he was playing with me. And his father's like, there is no boy here. There's no one around here that is your age. So he tells his son to go to bed. He goes to the front door and he, peers out. There's no one out there. He closes the door. Well, up until this point, he had been keeping this door unlocked because he felt like, we live in the woods, nothing's going to happen. But that night, he starts locking the door. Well, the next couple of weeks, is when they started to hear this banging sound at the front door, like someone was there. And when the father would go and answer the door, there would be no one there. And eventually, the father gets so frustrated and angry with whoever's knocking at the door that one night he hears the knocking. He goes to the front door, he opens it, and, he goes out on the porch and he starts screaming, what are you doing at my house? Leave us alone, leave my family alone, quit. And all of a sudden, he hears his name being called. And it sounds like a child's voice. And it's telling him to come out into the woods. So this father, kind of makes his way back inside, closes the door, and locks it. And at this point, he's like, something is definitely going on. So the next day, he goes into town, and he goes to the local hardware store. And he talks with some of the locals. And he starts telling them, I think something's after my family. I think something is trying to, scare us. And the locals say, look, we're not trying to be rude, but you need to take your family and get out of here and move back to town if you know what's best for you. And the father takes this as, oh, they're trying to scare me out of town because I'm from the city. So he goes back home and is like, they're not going to scare us. At this point, though, the family is so terrified that they are all sleeping in the same bedroom. And after a couple nights, of them sleeping in the bedroom together, the father wakes up and he sees his son standing next to the window and he's staring at something. And he's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is out there? What is out there? And he goes, they're here. They're here, Father. They're here. They're here. And he's like, who's here? And he's like, go back in the bed right now. He goes up to the window, and when he peers out, he sees all of these children standing around the house. And they have these bright, glowing white eyes. So he hurried up, he closes the curtains, and he gets in bed, and he holds his son, and he tells him, go to sleep. The next few days, he's very nervous. He's very on edge, but he doesn't know what to do. That night, he goes to bed with the family in the bedroom. He wakes up, and he discovers his family is all gone. He searches the entire home. They are nowhere. The only thing he finds is that the front door is open. So he figures they've taken his family out into the woods. So he runs as fast as he can out into the woods, and he starts screaming, where's my family? Give me back my family. And all of a sudden, he hears some movement coming through the woods. And out of the shadows steps this young boy. And as this boy takes a couple steps closer, he realizes it's his son. And he has these glowing white eyes. And he looks at his father and he says, not yet. And the father takes off running as fast as he can back to the house. He gets in his car, he drives into town and goes to the local pub. And he starts screaming to them, like, they've got my family, they've taken my family, like, you have to help me. And then he runs out of the bar and he leaves. And that was the last time that they ever seen this man or his family ever again. In the Appalachia, there is a particular set of rules that you must follow. You see, people lock their doors and windows at night. They close the curtains. They will not go outside because they know what's out there in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, this story comes out of the Roanoke Valley region of Virginia. There was this family from New York who had lived in the city most of their life. They wanted to get away and, live that remote urban life. So they find this beautiful home on 16 acres in this secluded area of the Roanoke Valley in the Appalachian Mountains. And their first day moving in, the father, he notices something weird. The neighbor actually comes not to greet them, not to welcome them to the area, but to warn them. And he says very specifically, at night, make sure you lock your doors and your windows and you close the curtains. And he said, it's very important. There is something out there. And he goes, you mean the people in this area are really like that you have to lock your doors? And he goes, I'm not talking about people. It's something else. But that's all I'm going to say. Now just remember, lock your doors and your windows at night. You'll be all right. So the neighbor leaves. Well, the father kind of just shakes it off and is like, okay, whatever. So they live there for several months, and they really enjoy their new life. Well, this one particular night, the family is sitting in the living room and they have a fire going. That's when the father notices that the son is standing next to the window and he's staring at something very intently. And so he asks the son, what are you staring at? What's out there? And he goes, Father, there's a boy out there. There's this young boy. Can I go and play with him? And the father's like, what are you talking about? There's no boy around here. We live in the woods. There's no one around here. And he's like, no, Father, there's a boy out there. There's a boy out there. And the father's like, you know what? It's time for bed. Go to bed. And he doesn't really think anything of it. Over the next couple of weeks, this son keeps looking out the window at something and telling his father, there's this boy outside. And he keeps drawing pictures of this boy. And he keeps saying, I really want to play with that boy. The father at the time just thinks, this is something to do with them moving and his active imagination. Until one night, the whole family is asleep. When the father wakes to a sound coming from the living room, he gets his wife up and he's like, I think someone's in the house. I think someone's broken in. Go and get the children, make sure they're safe. So he gets up, he goes down the hallway very slowly, and when he gets to the living room and he flips on the light, there's his son on the floor playing with his toys. And the front door is wide open. So he asks the son, what are you doing up? Why are you out of bed? And he goes, Father, I'm playing with the boy. And he goes, what boy? What are you talking about? And he said, the boy, he came inside and he was playing with me. And his father's like, there is no boy here. There's no one around here that is your age. So he tells his son to go to bed. He goes to the front door and he, peers out. There's no one out there. He closes the door. Well, up until this point, he had been keeping this door unlocked because he felt like, we live in the woods, nothing's going to happen. But that night, he starts locking the door. Well, the next couple of weeks, is when they started to hear this banging sound at the front door, like someone was there. And when the father would go and answer the door, there would be no one there. And eventually, the father gets so frustrated and angry with whoever's knocking at the door that one night he hears the knocking. He goes to the front door, he opens it, and, he goes out on the porch and he starts screaming, what are you doing at my house? Like, leave us alone, leave my family alone, like, quit. And all of a sudden, he hears his name being called. And it sounds like a child's voice. And it's telling him to come out into the woods. So this father, kind of makes his way back inside, closes the door, and locks it. And at this point, he's like, something is definitely going on. So the next day, he goes into town, and he goes to the local hardware store. And he talks with some of the locals. And he starts telling them, I think something's after my family. I think something is trying to, scare us. And the locals say, look, we're not trying to be rude, but you need to take your family and get out of here and move back to town if you know what's best for you. And the father takes this as, oh, they're trying to scare me out of town because I'm from the city. So he goes back home and is like, they're not going to scare us. At this point, though, the family is so terrified that they are all sleeping in the same bedroom. And after a couple nights of them sleeping in the bedroom together, the father wakes up and he sees his son standing next to the window. And he's staring at something. And he's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is out there? What is out there? And he goes, they're here. They're here, Father. They're here. They're here. And he's like, who's here? And he's like, go back in the bed right now. He goes up to the window, and when he peers out, he sees all of these children standing around the house. And they have these bright, glowing white eyes. So he hurries up, he closes the curtains, and he gets in bed, and he holds his son, and he tells him to go to sleep. The next few days, he's very nervous. He's very on edge, but he doesn't know what to do. That night, he goes to bed with the family in the bedroom. He wakes up, and he discovers his family is all gone. He searches the entire home. They are nowhere. The only thing he finds is that the front door is open. So he figures they've taken his family out into the woods. So he runs as fast as he can out into the woods, and he starts screaming, where's my family? Give me back my family. And all of a sudden, he hears some movement coming through the woods. And out of the shadows steps this young boy. And as this boy takes a couple steps closer, he realizes it's his son. And he has these glowing white eyes. And he looks at his father and he says, not yet. And the father takes off running as fast as he can back to the house. He gets in his car, he drives into town and goes to the local pub. And he starts screaming to them, like, they've got my family, they've taken my family, like, you have to help me. And then he runs out of the bar and he leaves. And that was the last time that they ever seen this man or his family ever again.
I absolutely love a good story about people who aren't quite human. So this man tells this story from when he was a teenager. He said he was home alone and somebody rang the doorbell and he answered. So he answers the door to find a guy standing there. And he says he's from a really small town, but despite that fact, he did not recognize him. So this guy introduces himself as the pastor of your parents' church. And he said, well, I guess that seemed plausible enough. He mentions never having met the pastor before, so it could be him. And then he goes, but I have no idea what he wanted or came here for because I was completely distracted by the fact that this man's eyes were slit like a cat's. He said, and it was super obvious too, because he also had extremely light blue eyes. And then he said an intense feeling of wrongness hit him in the chest. He said he got this feeling as though there were a nearby predator that he couldn't see. So he says that this guy keeps talking at him for a few minutes, but he cannot think of anything else other than concentrating on if what he is really seeing is reality. So he says after a little while, this really uneasy feeling inside of him was just way too much. And then he said he kind of mumbled something to him along the lines of, my parents aren't home, and then he shut the door and locked it. He also said that he never ended up meeting the pastor of his church in a formal way, so he doesn't know if this person or thing was lying. So what do you guys think? Is there a medical condition where both of his eyes would look like that? Are we talking some other being dressed up as a human? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and if you're new here, don't forget to follow for more creepy story time.
My mom told me about one of her paranormal encounters from when she was pregnant with me. This took place in California. My parents were living with my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins in a small house. Everything felt normal. Nothing ever seemed off, until one day, my tia decided to rearrange the living room. She moved their TV in front of their chimney because they barely used the fireplace. After that, strange things started happening. They had a picture of La Virgen de Guadalupe hanging on the wall, and my older cousin, still just a kid at the time, would always put his head down whenever he walked past it, avoiding looking at it. When they asked him why, he would always say, "Es porque está fea." In our family, we sometimes use fea, feo to describe something scary. So at first, they didn't think much of it. But not long after, my younger cousin, who was only a toddler then, was stomping around in my tia's boots, and everyone thought it was hilarious. My mom decided to take a picture of her, and at that moment, everything seemed normal. Until one day, my dad was looking at that photo and showed it to my mom. He said, "Mira la foto." My mom thought he was just showing her the picture again, so she smiled and said, "Sí, qué chistosa se mira." But my dad wasn't laughing. He looked serious and said, "Mira lo que está atrás de ella." Look what's behind her. My mom looked closer, and her heart dropped. In the dark behind my cousin, there was a silhouette of an older man just standing there, watching. That really scared my family. Around the same time, their small dog started barking and crying at the front door like crazy, almost as if someone or something was outside. After a few days, my mom began waking up in the middle of the night to sounds coming from the kitchen. Cabinets opening, plates sounding like they were being moved, silverware shifting around, only for her to go check and find nobody there. Eventually, they called a priest and a medium to bless the house and bless them. When the medium arrived, she immediately said something felt wrong. She communicated with whatever was wandering the house and said it was an elderly man who had died inside. He claimed my family had taken his spot. The medium said his spot was the chimney, so they moved the TV out of the way and inspected it. What they found there shook my family to the bone. A satanic pact, written out and signed between the man and the devil. Shortly after that, my family moved out of the house. It's been years since then, but sometimes my mom still drives me past it.
First of all, destiny swapping apparently is a thing. See how far some people are willing to go to swap destinies. And be from the people that you would least expect. I am back with another spooky story. So we're gonna call the person who submitted this story Cindy. Cindy had a cousin that she was very close to. There was a significant age gap between them. The cousin was a full-blown adult. Well, Cindy's 18 now, but all of this happened when Cindy was just 14. Cindy and the cousin, who's significantly older, were extremely close. They liked the same things, and Cindy used to open up to her about what she wanted to become later in life. And the cousin would always say, "Oh my God, you're so smart. I want to be like you." Mind you, the cousin is older than Cindy. Fast forward to Cindy being in high school. Out of nowhere, she randomly had the idea to change her name. Now remember this fact, this is going to be important later. Out of nowhere, she had the urge to change her name. Her cousin was very supportive of that. In fact, she convinced Cindy that her name, her original name, wasn't even that nice to begin with. Since Cindy was underage at the time, she couldn't change her name without her mother's approval. So she asked her mother, and her mother refused immediately. Her mother emphasized that her name, her real name, means purity, and that she shouldn't even be thinking about changing her name. So Cindy drops the idea. But after that, Cindy's mental health began to spiral. She became very slido. However, every attempt that she's ever had felt like an out-of-body experience. It was like she was watching herself from outside her body, and somehow she would always end up saving herself. One day at the school that Cindy was attending at the time, they decided to hold a 2-day deliverance session. During the first session, nothing major happened, but Cindy saw a black shadow figure holding on to her shoulders. Again, it felt like an out-of-body experience where she's witnessing herself from outside of her physical body. Now, during the second session, this is where things would escalate. So at the time of the second session, she wasn't even at the chapel. Suddenly, Cindy felt a strong urge to go there, so she went. When she arrived, she found her older sister with a certain boy. He looked at Cindy and said, "You need to pray." So they all joined hands in a prayer circle and began to pray. Immediately, Cindy started resisting the prayers, and that is when the exorcism began. Cindy said it felt like she left her body. She was standing in a desert and she saw another version of herself. She looked dirty and was wearing rags and she looked broken. And she said, "Don't let them take me, Cindy. We're one. We're the same." And Cindy just stood there watching her, and slowly, she started disappearing. The next thing that Cindy remembered is waking up in the chapel office with her sister and the boy that had been praying with them. They gave her water because apparently she had been throwing up the entire exorcism. Later, they told her that as they were praying for her, the demon occupying her body spoke. It said that the cousin had gone to a witch doctor and asked to swap destinies with Cindy. But the witch doctor told her because of her name being Cindy, which means purity, he could not harm her destiny. Either Cindy had to denounce her name and change her identity, or straight up commit suicide to get rid of her spirit and its purity. Only then would they be able to swap destinies. Remember when Cindy got the random idea to change her name once and that failed? Well, since the name change failed, she allegedly went back to a ritualist and paid him 20 million. Now this is in Uganda, so it's not 20 million USD. So he could send a doppelganger spirit to occupy Cindy's body, basically make her herself. And Cindy's unalivement would have granted her cousin her destiny. And that's why Cindy made so many attempts on her life, randomly wanted to change her name. But because of the name that her mother gave her, and because of her prayers, she survived. I don't know. Don't swap destinies with your cousin, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening to this spooky story. If you have a spooky story that you want me to tell, feel free to submit it to me right here on TikTok or my DMs on Instagram. Make sure you check out I have longer, better, and spookier stories over there. If you're watching this and you're a part of my members only, please let them know down below that it's worth it. Like I say at the end of all of my videos, I love you, my abducted humans, from your favorite Haitian homegirl.
What is the weirdest thing that's happened to you when you bought something secondhand? When I first heard this title, because obviously I'm translating it from Spanish to English, I thought it was gonna be like, oh, like something made an appearance, like something small, like a little ghost, maybe the owner of the whatever item is. You're not gonna expect the story that I'm about to tell you. I need my mom to come to the front and listen to this story. Here's the thing though, I love thrift shopping. Like, I have no shame in my game, okay? The thing is, my mom is the type of person to buy the things that you in your head think of something that would be haunted at a thrift store. That is what my mom bought. I can give you a quick example too. So one time she went to a thrift store and she found this little angel, like an angel doll that you put on top of the Christmas tree. She brings it home because she loves things like that, which is great. It's great. It just looks really fucking haunted. Why did my stepdad wake up around 3 or 4 in the morning hearing like a music playing? So he walks towards the music, because at first he thought my little brother had left the TV on, which is why he came out to turn it off. It wasn't the TV. He followed the sound into this bucket where my mom puts like all her Christmas stuff in, pulls out the doll. It was the doll playing. Obviously he's like, shit, like it's malfunctioning, it doesn't want to turn off, so he turns it around to like where the batteries are so he could take them out, opens that bitch up, and there's no batteries in there. Yeah, he dead ass took that little doll to his job to throw it in their trash can. Olmito, Texas. I hope you did not find it. So this girl says that when she was 15 years old, her mom and dad lived in a house that belonged to her dad's boss. After some time, the dad's boss decided that he wanted to put that house for rent, and because they were able to save money, they decided to buy this small little house. This little house only had 1 bedroom, the kitchen, the dining area, and a restroom. She said that with time, they did start adding more to the house, more bedrooms, and things like that. So around that time, in order to make some money, she said that her dad would buy secondhand furniture and then resell it. So one day she says that her dad brought this couch that it was just in their house for 1 day. They had left the couch in this room, which now is the dining area. So she says that that night, I guess the AC had shut off and she woke up because she was really hot. She ends up turning the AC back on and then decides that she's gonna go to the restroom. She ends up using the restroom without turning on any of the lights, and she comes back to her room. When she closes the door, she says that she almost felt as if somebody was standing next to her. She honestly thought that it was her dad, but when she turned to look at it, she noticed that this figure was way taller than anybody in her family. As she's looking at this figure, she knows exactly who it is, and she says that standing in front of her is La Santa Muerte. Out of pure reflexes, she tried to punch her, and that's when she saw the Santa pick up 2 of her fingers and she went flying onto her bed. After sending her flying to her bed, she said that the Santa stood right in front of her face and just started laughing at her. They were able to sell that couch right away, and she says that her mom had told her that where they got the couch from, they could tell that there had been rituals done there, and that the owner of that couch had recently passed away. She says that after that situation situation happened, she literally lived in fear inside that house. Obviously, she told her parents what happened. They did end up taking her to get a cleansing, but they had to sleep with her every night because she would wake up screaming bloody murder. She admits that till this day, sometimes she wakes up in the middle of the night and can see her standing by her bed. She doesn't know if she's there to protect her or because she wants something from her. What she does know is that she has never left ever since that day. What do you guys think?
Weird spooky dating story. This comes from the subreddit just called Ghost Stories. I've been an avid reader of this subreddit since 2017, ever since my first ghost encounter in the Philippines, but that's a story for another time. Given how recent this particular experience was and the fact that I have some photographic evidence, I figured it would be worth sharing. My wife and I got married in New Orleans on March 7th. As a gift, my sister-in-law covered a 3-night stay for us at Hotel St. Vincent. For context, this hotel was originally an infant asylum before being converted into a boutique hotel in 2021. On the night of Thursday, March 6th, after our welcome party, my wife and I returned to our room and ordered room service. After eating, we had to separate for the night to follow the tradition of sleeping apart before the wedding. My wife stayed with her family, and there was no way in hell I was staying alone in that room given the hotel's history. I knew I'd psych myself out all night, so I crashed in my mom's hotel room since she had an extra bed. The next morning, I went back to our room to get ready for the wedding. I spent most of the morning alone, and the vibes felt fine. At some point, I was scrolling through my camera roll looking at pictures from the night before when I noticed that my wife had taken a photo of our room. Something in the reflection of the TV screen caught my eye. I zoomed in and immediately noped the F out. I decided I wasn't going to look at the image again until we checked out. Meanwhile, some friends were also staying at the hotel, and one couple in particular ended up changing rooms multiple times. My husband had never believed in ghosts before, but after their experience at Hotel St. Vincent, that changed. They reported seeing handprints, a chandelier moving despite no open windows or AC, and even the hotel staff cover all the mirrors. Now back to our wedding night. We returned to our room around 2 a.m., completely exhausted. I didn't experience anything, but my wife later told me that she was lying in bed taking off her veil. She heard voices. She didn't mention it to me until we had checked out. Despite that, we managed to sleep through the night, though we did leave a light on. Then came Saturday, our final night in New Orleans. After saying goodbye to our remaining wedding guests, we had got back to our room around 9:30 p.m. As we were getting ready for bed, my wife suddenly said, "Did you hear that?" The second she said it, I replied, "Yes." I immediately got chills. We both heard a distinct whooshing sound as if something was moving through the room. My wife kept hearing it throughout the night, while I caught it a few times, but the unease alone was enough to keep me awake. Thankfully, we had to leave at 4:45 a.m. for a quick post-wedding getaway in Miami, and with daylight savings that night, the hours flew by. My wife managed to doze off for a bit, but later told me that while she was dreaming about the wedding and trying to focus on happy thoughts, disturbing images kept interrupting her sleep, such as an old photograph of a woman and a child screaming. I, on the other hand, didn't sleep at all. I kept my eyes closed, but the overwhelming feeling of being watched never faded. When my 4:20 a.m. alarm finally went off, I jumped out of bed, ready to get the hell out of there. As I was packing our bags and my wife was brushing her teeth, I heard a voice behind me. Thinking it was her, I asked, "Did you say something?" She hadn't. That was it. We were out. While waiting in line at the airport, I finally told my wife about the photo I had seen in the TV reflection. I had purposely avoided showing it to her until we left the hotel. When I zoomed in and handed her the phone to her, she turned pale and said, "I'm gonna throw up." A couple of days later, I decided to look at the photo again. This time, I zoomed in on the other side of the image, and I swear I could make out the line of a child with eyes staring from below the mirror under the lamp. So that's the story. If anyone has experienced anything similar at Hotel St. Vincent, I'd love to hear about it. Much love to this community for reaffirming my belief since my first encounter back in the Philippines. So this is the original photo that his wife took, and here are the zoom-ins. So this is what he's referring to in the corner of the TV. and this is the mirror. To be honest, I'm not really seeing what he saw, but if you guys can, I'd love it for you to point it out to me.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
On the evening of Wednesday, March 26th, 2003, a 55-year-old woman named Linda Myers drove down a secluded two-lane road in Darke County, Ohio. Darke County was very rural. It was basically just very small towns and farmland. And so as Linda drove down the road, kind of in the middle of nowhere, she looked out her window and she saw the sun setting over a field. She was coming home from the pizza shop that she and her husband Jack owned in a town nearby. Linda eventually turned down a gravel road and onto the sprawling 40-acre farm where she and her husband lived. She parked outside their old farmhouse, and then she grabbed a deposit bag with money from the pizza shop out of the back seat, and then she got out of her car. Their farm was so isolated that she couldn't hear any cars on the road or anything from the neighbors' houses. So it was completely quiet, except for the sheep that were bleating in the field and the occasional sound of power tools coming from the barn. She walked around to the back of the barn, and she found Jack hunched over the engine of a beat-up old car. The two of them had been married for about 7 years, and even though this was actually Linda's third marriage, she really felt like Jack was her soulmate. In addition to owning the shop with Linda, the pizza shop, Jack also had a full-time job at a manufacturing plant, and he also had a side business restoring cars. And so Linda often found him out here behind the barn working on a car around the time the sun was going down. And sitting in the grass beside the car, playing with a wrench, was Linda's 4-year-old great-grandson, Damien. And the second Damien saw Linda, he smiled and he got up and he rushed over to her to give her a big hug. And Damien's smile made Linda feel sort of bittersweet. Damien was the son of Linda's granddaughter, Amber. But Amber had gotten pregnant at just 14 years old, and so as a result had not been in any position to take care of a baby. So Linda and Jack had offered to take Damien in and raise him for a few years while Amber finished high school and got on her feet. However, this was definitely not a perfect arrangement for many reasons, but one of those reasons was because Damien's father was furious about being cut out of the custody agreement. Even now, 4 years after, Damien's situation had been decided, the father still argued with Linda about how she wouldn't let him see his son. But Linda felt like as much as he was saying he wanted to be in Damien's life, she felt like at some point he was going to abandon this child, and so she really didn't want him to be around Damien at all. She didn't want her great-grandson to be abandoned like that. And besides, Damien would have another father figure in his life soon enough, because in the past few years, Amber had finished school, she had met a new man, and gotten married. And as soon as Damien finished up this year of preschool in a couple of months, Amber and her new husband were planning to take him in and raise him on their own. Linda was proud of Amber, how she had turned her life around, but she also felt a little sad, bittersweet, because she and Jack were going to miss having Damien around. They loved him. He was basically their son. Linda knew that Jack clearly was busy with this car and kind of didn't want to be interrupted. So she just said a quick hello and then scooped Damien up and carried him over to the farmhouse. She opened up the door and she sat him down and told him to go wash up before dinner. Then she went into the kitchen and she dropped the deposit bag from the pizza shop into a chair in the dining room. The bag was full of cash, and her plan was to drop it off at the bank in the morning. Linda got out a pan and began cooking dinner, and pretty soon her husband Jack came inside, covered in car grease. While Jack washed his hands at the kitchen sink, Linda asked him about his day. And Jack kind of grumbled about this customer that he had sold a car to on a payment plan the previous year, who had now missed 3 payments in a row. Jack said he was going to have to drive out there to the person's house tomorrow and repossess the car. Linda could see, Jack is obviously pretty tense here, but Linda knew it wasn't really that missed car payment that was bothering him. The truth was, Jack had been sort of tense really for the past week, ever since he had had this big argument with his 25-year-old son, Greg. Greg had always been very shy and mild-mannered and really close with his dad. In fact, he was the best man at Jack and Linda's wedding. But recently, Greg's life had been falling off the rails. He was in the middle of a divorce, he was struggling with drinking and drug abuse, and he'd been missing shifts at work. And so earlier that month, he had come by to ask Jack for money because his house was about to be foreclosed on. And Jack had drawn a line and said no. He told Greg that if he wanted to keep his house, he'd have to clean up his act and get back to work. And so that had led to a very big fight. And so now Linda had a feeling that Jack was genuinely worried that he'd done real damage to his relationship with Greg, perhaps irreparably, because something pretty similar had also happened with Jack's other son, Travis. About 7 years earlier, when Travis was 21, he and Jack had gotten into this big argument that was so bad, Travis moved out, and then the two of them had not spoken since for 7 years. So Linda thought Jack must be worried that that would be the same thing that would happen with him and Greg. So while Jack washed his hands, Linda rubbed his shoulders and told him not to worry about Greg. He had a good head on his shoulders, and he just needed a little nudge to get back on track, and that's all Jack had done. She reassured him that he'd made the right call and Greg would get through this rough patch sooner or later. Then Linda set the table and called the family to dinner. A little while later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, Linda looked up at the clock and realized it was getting kind of late. Damien had preschool in the morning, and she didn't want him to be tired and grumpy. So she scooped him up and took him to his room upstairs to get ready for bed. She helped him change into his PJs, she brushed his teeth, then tucked him in, gave him a kiss goodnight, and closed the door. Linda went back downstairs, and before long, she and Jack were getting ready for bed too. Before long, Linda was in her bedroom, she had turned on a lamp, she had changed into her PJs and crawled under the covers. And then once Jack was settled in next to her, she turned off the light, and they fell asleep. But several hours later, Linda was suddenly woken up by this horribly loud noise, and she sat up and looked around, and when her eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, she gasped. The next morning, at a church a mile away from Linda and Jack's house, a preschool teacher was getting ready to start class, but she noticed there was an empty chair in her classroom. One of her students, 4-year-old Damien Huffman, was late. She knew Damien's great-grandparents led busy lives and had several different jobs and businesses, so she figured they must just be running late. So she began class and hoped they would just drop Damien off before he missed too much. And about an hour later, at 9:30 a.m., she was leading the class in morning sing-alongs when Damien suddenly came sprinting into the classroom. Now, at first, the teacher was relieved that Damien had shown up. But then she realized Damien looked frazzled and out of breath, and he didn't have his backpack, and he was wearing PJs, and there was the smear of something brown on his shirt. She ran over to him and knelt down next to him and realized the brown spot was dried blood. The teacher asked Damien what was going on, and he looked at her with this scared, confused expression, and he told her his great-grandparents' faces were melting. About 15 minutes later, a police sergeant named Mark Whitaker, along with his partner, drove down a secluded road toward a farmhouse in rural Ohio. Sergeant Whitaker had been a detective for the Darke County Sheriff's Department for 5 years, and he was in charge of the investigative unit. So when the department had gotten a very strange 911 call that morning from a local preschool, he was sent out to investigate. According to the preschool teacher, a 4-year-old student named Damien Huffman had come into school covered in blood, out of breath, saying something about his great-grandparents' faces being, melting. The teacher identified the great-grandparents as Linda and Jack Myers. Now, Whitaker had no idea what Damien meant when he had said that their faces were melting, or what kind of situation, Whitaker and his partner would be walking into when they got to the farm. But he had a feeling it would not be good. They pulled up to the farm and parked at the end of the long gravel road. And when Whitaker got out of his car, he immediately noticed how eerily quiet it was. There was another farmhouse just across the road and a few more on the horizon, but otherwise they were surrounded by empty fields in every direction. Whitaker began walking towards the front door when he saw the front door was already wide open, but there was no clear sign of forced entry. But nonetheless, Whitaker and his partner reflexively drew their weapons and they stepped inside the house. Whitaker began calling out to see if anybody was home, but there was no response. From where he was standing, he saw there was another open door in the house that led to a set of stairs that went down presumably to the basement. Whitaker ignored the basement for now and instead continued clearing the first floor. So he went into the kitchen, and once he was sure it was clear, he continued down the hallway until he found a doorway that led into a bedroom. And when he went inside that bedroom, he found Damien's great-grandparents, Jack and Linda Myers, and they were lying in their bed, side by side, and he could tell immediately they were both dead. Now, Jack was actually lying on his stomach, and he could tell right away there was a big bullet wound on the back of Jack's neck. As for Linda, she was on her back, and she had gunshot wounds to her face and her hand, as if she had raised her hand to defend herself before she was shot. And so at this point, Whitaker and his partner did a full search of the house just to make sure nobody else was there, and it was empty. And so the two went back to the bedroom to begin investigating the bodies. Whitaker put on a pair of latex gloves and touched the wound on Linda's face. And the blood was still warm and wet, so he figured likely they'd only been dead for maybe a few hours at most. He looked around the floor, and he didn't see any bullet casings, which meant the killer had gone through the trouble of picking them up afterwards to cover their tracks. Then, Whitaker's partner called his attention to this weird plasticky bundle that was lying on a pillow near Jack's head. Whitaker picked it up, and he saw it was a piece of quilting fabric that was balled up and covered in masking tape. His best guess was that it was a homemade gun silencer. The killer likely taped it to the end of their gun to muffle the sound of the blast, and it must have, blown off at some point when they actually began shooting. Immediately, Whitaker wondered if this was a silencer, why the killer would need one so far out in the middle of nowhere. But when Whitaker left the bedroom and went up a flight of stairs to the room right above where the murders had taken place, he found another bedroom that was full of stuffed animals and toy trucks. It was obviously Damien's room. And it was at this point that Whitaker realized, very likely the killer must have known there was going to be a toddler sleeping right upstairs when they did this, and so they needed the silencer in order to not wake the child when they committed this murder. And so this meant that the killer almost certainly knew Jack and Linda personally. Within minutes, more officers from the Darke County Sheriff's Office swarmed the property. Whitaker went outside to supervise them, and pretty quickly, a forensics officer called him over to look at a set of footprints that they had found in the mud. Whitaker followed the trail of footprints around the side of the house to a basement window. The window pane had been pried off, leaving an open hole that was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Whitaker crouched down and looked through the open space, and he could see inside there was a set of stairs leading up to the main part of the house. And so he realized this must have been how the killer got inside. And it was also why, when they had first gone inside, that they had seen the door to the basement standing wide open. And so this only made Whitaker more sure that this crime had to have been committed by somebody close to this couple, because the killer obviously knew the layout of Linda and Jack's house. Whitaker told the forensics officer to make a cast of the footprints so they could figure out what type and size of shoe the killer was wearing. And then as Whitaker stood back up, he noticed something else. The phone lines that were running along the side of the house had clearly been severed. The killer clearly had planned ahead and made sure that nobody in this house could call for help. Just then, a truck pulled up at the end of the road, and a woman got out and started walking toward the house. Whitaker quickly went over to stop her from getting too close to the crime scene, and he asked her what she needed. And she said she was a neighbor who lived at the next property over. She said that she had seen the police cars coming down the road, and she didn't really know what was going on, but she felt like she had information that they might want. The neighbor said that around 4:30 that morning, she'd seen a minivan leaving the Myers farm. It had been so dark that she hadn't been able to see what color it was, but it had stuck out to her because as far as she knew, the Myers did not own a minivan. And so hearing this, Whitaker realized, this woman may have seen the killer leaving the property. And if that was true, it meant the murders most likely happened before 4:30 in the morning. And so this was potentially quite useful. And so he thanked the neighbor, and after she left, he went back inside the house to look for more clues. He really wanted to piece together a motive. He felt strongly that whoever had done this knew Linda and Jack, but that doesn't mean that the motive is clear. There could be any number of reasons they would attack them. Maybe it was a robbery. Maybe they were just, getting revenge or something. He didn't know, but as he began walking around the house, he found a literal deposit bag full of cash in the living room, which certainly suggested that this was not a robbery, because that would certainly have been taken. And also there were some pretty expensive electronics in the living room that also had not been touched, so robbery seemed to be out the door. But when Whitaker went back upstairs to take a closer look at the toddler's bedroom, he noticed something odd. There was a little red stain on the bedding that looked like dried blood. While forensics teams were still combing over the farmhouse, another investigator assigned to the case, a guy named Detective Mike Burns, went to the local preschool to speak to 4-year-old Damien. Burns was a father himself, and he felt an immediate connection to this little boy, who at this point looked scared and very confused. Now, he knew it was going to be very difficult for Damien to rehash something that was so traumatic, but Damien was the only potential witness in the house when his great-grandparents were killed. So speaking to him was the police's best bet at figuring out what happened. And so Burns sat down on the floor with Damien inside of a private room, and he asked him to explain what had happened that morning. Damien, in a, 4-year-old way, said he'd woken up around 8:45 and the house had been very quiet, so he'd gotten out of bed and went into his great-grandparents' bedroom. And then he said that both of them had been in bed, and he thought they were sleeping. But when he tried to wake them up, they wouldn't move. And then he realized there was blood on their face, and he said he had tried to wipe the blood off with Kleenex wipes. But there was so much of it that he realized something was very wrong. He thought for a second that their faces were melting. And so, to save his great-grandparents, he had run the full mile down the road to his preschool to get help. Burns was surprised that this 4-year-old could remember and articulate so much about such an awful experience. But he was very grateful because the child's story explained why there was blood on Damien's shirt. However, it did not explain why they'd also found blood on Damien's bed. So he asked Damien if he had gone back into his own room after finding his great-grandparents. But Damien said no. He'd gone straight out the front door and gone to his school. Burns thought there had to be more to the story, though, because otherwise he just couldn't explain how blood wound up in Damien's room. So he brought over a dollhouse, and he asked Damien to go ahead and act out everything that had happened the night before, using toys to represent himself and his great-grandparents. Damien put the toy that represented himself into bed in one room, and then he put Jack and Linda into the bed in the other room. And he said everybody went to sleep at their normal bedtimes. But later, in the middle of the night, he heard his bedroom door open, and he said somebody came inside. Burns asked Damien who it was. And Damien paused, and then he said, "The green monster." At first, Burns wasn't really sure what to make of this. He wondered if Damien was just imagining things or describing a nightmare or something. But then Damien set the toys down, and then to represent this green monster, he used his fingers to crawl across the floor of the dollhouse toward Damien's bed. Damien said he had heard the door open in his room and he had opened his eyes just a little bit, but he didn't want to give away that he was fully awake, so he's just squinting his eyes. And he said when he did that, he saw the green monster right next to his bed, and the green monster was pointing a gun at him. And Damien was so terrified, he said he shut his eyes and just pretended to be asleep. And then he said when he opened his eyes again, the green monster was gone. After hearing this, Burns realized that Damien's recollection was almost certainly not a dream. More likely than not, Damien had come face to face with his grandparents' killer. They were the green monster. After leaving the preschool, the next priority for Detective Burns was to speak to Damien's mother, 19-year-old Amber Holscher. And so the detective drove out to Amber's house, which was in a nearby town, and when he rang the doorbell, she answered right away. Now, at this point, nobody in the family had been notified yet about the murders, so Amber seemed to have no idea why a detective was now standing on her doorstep. Now, Burns knew this, and so he said to her, "Can I please come inside? We need to speak." And so, confused, Amber said okay, and she let him inside, and they sat down in the living room. And then Burns said to her, very gently, that her grandparents, Linda and Jack Myers, were no longer with them. But when Amber heard this, she just looked confused and asked what he meant, like, where are they? So Burns took a deep breath and he clarified that they were deceased. Amber looked completely shocked and immediately asked, "Is Damien dead too?" But Burns said, no, he's alive, but he's going to be kept in protective custody for a while in case whoever killed Jack and Linda try to hurt him too. And until they narrowed down the suspects, Damien would not be allowed to see anybody in the family, including her, his own mother. At this point, Amber just began to cry. Burns felt horrible for her, but really he was thinking about Damien. He knew he had to solve this case as quickly as possible because every day that he didn't would be another day that Damien would have to spend alone without any family to comfort him. Based both on Amber's reaction to the news and the fact that Damien did not mention seeing his mother on the night of the murder, Burns thought it was highly unlikely that Amber was a suspect, but she could know something that might help the investigation. So, once she calmed down, Burns asked her if she knew anyone who might have wanted to hurt her grandparents. And right away, she nodded, and she mentioned Damien's father, Andrew Huffman. She said Andrew hated Linda because she wouldn't let him see Damien. In fact, just recently, Andrew had come to Linda's pizza shop and started a fight with her about custody. And it had escalated to the point where Andrew had publicly threatened to kill her. This obviously caught Burns' attention because it made perfect sense as a motive. If Linda and Jack were out of the way, well, Andrew would have an easier time getting custody of Damien. And so he thanked Amber and promised he would be in touch soon. And then as soon as he was back in his car, he called Sergeant Whitaker and he told him what he'd learned. Later that day, Whitaker and his partner made the 2-hour drive to Andrew's address in Newport, Kentucky. When they got there, Andrew quickly came to the door and he let them inside and they sat down and Andrew looked at them like, what's going on? And they told him that Linda and Jack had been murdered. And they watched Andrew for his reaction. And he seemed very surprised, but he definitely did not seem upset. Andrew would then admit that he did not get along with Amber's family. And when Whitaker asked him about that big argument at the pizza shop, Andrew did not deny that he had literally threatened to kill Linda. But he swore he would never actually do it. He said it was just an empty threat he made in the heat of the moment. Still, Whitaker thought Andrew looked very suspicious, so he asked him for an alibi. And Andrew said he'd stayed over at a girl's house on the night of the murder, and in the morning he'd stopped by his dad's house and then gone straight to work. And you could ask all those people, and that's where he was. Whitaker wrote all this down and then asked Andrew a few more questions and then thanked him for his time. And then as soon as the detectives left, they immediately went to go check on Andrew's alibi. They went to that girl's house, then they went to Andrew's dad's house, and then they also went to his place of work, and everybody at those 3 locations all confirmed Andrew's alibi. So unless someone was lying, it left no window of time where Andrew could have driven 2 hours away to Ohio to murder Jack and Linda. Whitaker was disappointed that they basically wasted most of the day on this lead that now looked like it wouldn't go anywhere. Especially knowing that, again, every moment in this case that it went unsolved was another moment that Damien would have to spend away from his family all alone. The following morning, Detective Burns, the same officer who had spoken to Damien and also his mother Amber, sat inside of his office feeling very frustrated. He had one goal for the day. He wanted to interview Jack's estranged son, 28-year-old Travis Myers. But it was looking like that was going to be harder than he had anticipated. So the day before, a bunch of sheriff's deputies had interviewed Linda and Jack's family and friends, and family members in particular had mentioned that Travis and Jack had some bad blood. And when Burns had dug through the files on Travis, he found out that Travis also had a criminal record. But there was a problem. It appeared that Travis hadn't even been in Ohio in 7 years. The last anybody in the family had heard, he'd moved to Arizona to live with his mother. But when Burns had called the mother that morning, she said that she actually didn't know where Travis was at all. And there was no other address on record for Travis, so Burns basically had no idea where he was. And so he began to wonder, how was he going to track Travis down? And he decided he should start by visiting Travis's younger brother and Jack's other son, whose name was Greg. Burns knew Greg lived only a few towns over, and even though he really wasn't sure how close the brothers might be, it was the only lead he really had. A little while later, Burns showed up at Greg's house and he knocked on the front door. And a moment later, a young man in a baseball cap answered, and he looked very much like he'd been crying. Burns asked if he was Greg Myers, and the young man nodded and stepped aside to let him in. Greg did not seem remotely surprised by this visit. He said the police had already contacted him the night before to tell him about his father and stepmother's murder, and since then, he said he'd just been waiting for somebody to come by and talk to him, because he'd seen enough TV to know that family members were always the first suspects. But when they got into the living room, Burns stopped in his tracks because there was another young man standing in the doorway, and he looked a lot like Greg. Burns asked who it was, and Greg said, "Oh, that's my brother, Travis." Burns couldn't believe his luck. He'd come here hoping to figure out where Travis might be, but he never imagined he would just find Travis standing in Greg's house. And this was a big development because really until now, Burns had no idea if Travis was even in the state at the time of the murders. But Greg would actually tell him that Travis had been in Ohio for the past several weeks, staying in an apartment that he had rented right nearby. Burns did think the timing seemed very suspicious. It just seemed way too convenient that Travis had come back into town for the first time in almost a decade, right before Jack and Linda were killed. It just seemed too perfect. And also at this point, it just seemed really suspicious that these two brothers are just standing here waiting for police to come question them. Something felt off. So Burns, operating on a gut instinct, told them both that in order to question them, they actually had to come with him to the station and do it formally down there. Less than an hour later, Detective Burns opened the door of the Dark County Sheriff's Office and he showed Greg and Travis Myers inside. Now, neither of the brothers were under arrest yet, but Burns had a feeling that by the end of their interviews, one or both of them could be. Burns took Greg into his office for questioning, while Burns' partner took Travis into a room down the hall. As soon as Greg sat down in front of the desk, Burns noticed that he wasn't making eye contact with him. He was sort of acting shifty.
I recently came across a video of a girl that said that she was in a nightclub with a bunch of her friends. She happened to be the only sober one. And as she's sitting there kind of looking around, she says that everybody at the club had demonic looking faces. Like she said, everyone around her that was drunk, like their faces didn't look right. It was almost like they had been overtaken by a D word. This unlocked a memory for me. I remember back in 2019 was probably the last time that I ever went to the club. I happened to be the designated driver that night, so I did not drink. I was completely sober. After hanging out with my friends for most of the day, they wanted to go to this after hours place that I was completely against, but I ended up being practically dragged to go there. We get there. They're all into it because they're drunk. I'm the sober one. As I'm standing there inside this nightclub, this packed nightclub, I'm looking around and I'm seeing that everyone's faces just don't look right. It's almost like their faces look distorted. And not to sound mean, but I remember sitting there thinking I have never seen so many hideous people in my life. Their faces were just not right. It was just they just almost didn't even look human with how weird distorted their faces look. And I remember kind of looking around thinking is there something in the air? Am I being influenced by something that's affecting my vision? I don't know, but it really freaked me out. And everyone was just dancing so aggressively, and I was just kind of looking around I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. And of course my friends were all into it. Thankfully a fight ended up breaking out in the club and we all ended up leaving. That's the only reason we left. But as I was standing around, I'm in my mind, I'm I do not belong here. And it was almost it looked very ritualistic. It didn't feel right being in that club. That club actually has shut down since because so many unalivings ended up happening in this club. This club was not it. But it kind of brings me back to the point of the video is when you are drinking, especially when you black out, when you're drinking, your energy is extremely low vibrational. And if you black out, you're no longer home. And guess what happens when a house is empty and there's a wandering entity or dark thing that's near you? It's gonna wanna habitate. It's gonna wanna, which is why you may still be coherent and you're acting all crazy, doing whatever it is when you black out, but you don't remember any of it because it wasn't actually you in there doing all of it. It was something else that took over your body. I'm not saying that I'm a saint when it comes to the drinking world because I do plan on drinking again on Valentine's, but just telling you guys to just be careful when you're out, especially when you're out and about and you're drinking to that extent. Anything will take over you if you give them the chance.
Here's some more strange things that happened on the set of horror movies. The Poltergeist was released in 1982 and it was a wildly popular film and it still has a cult following to this day. Two people would sadly lose their lives during the filming of this, and that was Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann. She sadly was just 12 years old when she passed away on the operating table. Dominic Dune, who played the older sister Dana, she also lost her life. Her boyfriend would take her life away from her after the day that the first movie premiered. Cast and crew were obviously disturbed by what had happened, and the producer William Sampson had a priest come and exorcise the set to set it free from the evil. But Will Sampson would also pass away shortly after Poltergeist 2 was finished. The Exorcist is another popular horror movie. There were a lot of strange things that happened on the set, but there were several people who also lost their lives. The actor Jack McGoran, and I probably said his name wrong, correct me down in the comments, but he passed away unexpectedly a couple of days after he wrapped up his part of the movie. There was also a special effects worker and a security guard who passed away during the production of this movie, and also the set burned down with no explanation and it had to be completely rebuilt. The director, William Friedkin, and I probably said that wrong, but he had a priest come perform a real-life exorcism on the set, but it didn't stop the curse. Many people who watched the movie when it hit theaters, watched the movie in its entirety, had heart attacks after watching it. So people believe that maybe The Exorcist is cursed. Rosemary's Baby is an interesting one as well. Producer William Castle received an anonymous letter saying that he would slowly rot during a long and painful disease. And shortly after he received this letter, he had to go surgery to combat a problem. And this problem would haunt him for months. On top of that, the entire cast got food poisoning all of a sudden, and a producer had a stroke while driving home from the set. Again, people think that maybe this movie is cursed. During the filming of Psycho, there was a uncredited body double named Mira Jones, whose life was taken by a handyman named Kenneth Dean Hunt. He said that he took her life because he was trying to impress Alfred Hitchcock. He said that he was obsessed with this director and he was just trying to impress him. When Alfred Hitchcock heard about this, he gathered the cast and crew and said, "It appears we now have all the motivation we need to complete this film," which feels kind of icky. During the filming of The Omen, 2 planes were hit by lightning that had like screenwriters or producers on them, which seems like a very strange coincidence. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that it's very weird that 2 planes got hit by lightning. And another plane crashed, leaving 11 people who had lost their lives. All of that just seems very strange to be surrounding one movie. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that these were actually cursed, or is it all just a coincidence? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and follow for more spooky things.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. You already know what it is. You already know what it is. If you like them, they're here. Now onto the story. Ever since I was little, I have always sensed things. I would talk to people who weren't there when I was a toddler to ages 6 or 7. My parents once walked in on me talking to Paul and Darren, who I would later find out were the names of 2 deceased grandfathers. Paul died in World War II and Darren passed due to AIDS-related pneumonia. That's sad. When I was around 10, my mom was talking with a grocery store clerk and I said, "You have a Dalmatian? That's so cool." Both my mother and the clerk looked at me confused and she asked how I knew that. "Yeah, how the fuck do you know that?" I would be freaked out too. "Well, you just said it." Both my mom and the clerk looked even more confused, explained how she was talking about how she's from New York. Nothing was ever mentioned about her dog, which was in fact a Dalmatian. I would also get goodbyes from those close to me when they passed. Something like a dream or seeing them just for a moment wave goodbye right after their passing. My mom was constantly unnerved by this, but my dad understood. I didn't know at the time that he also just knew things. It would upset my mother all the time because he would say things like, "I'm going to die young and it'll be sudden." Just matter of fact like. Now why the fuck? Why the fuck are you saying that? That's one of those things like, if you have that feeling, like you can't help but having that feeling, but at the same time, you repeating it, I feel like you're just speaking that into fucking existence. You know what I mean? You're just telling the universe what it's gonna do. Stop fucking doing that. Over the years, I would just push this down and ignore it, but I would still get final goodbyes from those close to me that would pass. February of 2017, I was trying to wake my husband up for work, and for some reason, I thought, I'm never gonna see my dad again. Oof. 20 minutes later, I received a phone call from my stepmom saying that my dad had passed suddenly. I was absolutely devastated. He was my best friend and I really wouldn't get to see him again. I didn't sleep for 3 days after his passing, but when I finally did, there he was sitting on the couch of my living room. We sat and talked for what seemed like ages, but also in an instant he finished with, "I love you, kiddo. I'm sorry I had to leave like that." I woke up sobbing. Bitch, I'm about to start sobbing. That is so fucking sad. It was a bittersweet moment for me. I got my final goodbye, but I knew it was also final. That's so sad. I will say, my mom told me one time whenever my great-grandpa passed away, whenever I was little, she said that she had a dream that he was like sitting on the edge of her bed and they had a conversation, like a goodbye type situation too. I've never experienced that, but I just feel like it would be fucking sad. Especially like in the dream or whatever it is, you're having the actual conversation about what has happened, like in reality, not your dream. You know what I mean? Am I making any sense? I don't fucking know. Anyway, that wasn't really scary, creepy, spooky. That was more sad as fuck. Maybe a little bit spooky yuki because you were talking to Paul and Darren, the old grandpas or whoever they were that had died, you know? And then also saying that the lady said that she had a dog because you heard that she said that she had a dog that was a Dalmatian specifically, but she never said that. That's a little bit of a heebie moment, but nothing like scary, you know what I mean? But you can still rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I'll see y'all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
Lucy Letby worked as a nurse in the neonatal unit in Chester, England. The neonatal unit's also referred to as a NICU, and those are reserved for newborns who need extra medical attention. I have personal experience with this. My daughter was born 2 months premature, so she spent 30 days in the NICU. And all parents who have had their children stay at the hospital know that you have to put your faith and trust in the doctors and nurses that they're making the best decision in caring for your children, especially your fragile newborns. Having said that, between 2015 and 2016, the hospital that Lucy Letby worked at noticed a significant rise in the number of babies who are passing away in serious, sudden, catastrophic medical collapses. Now, this can happen in pediatric cases where their health can deteriorate quickly, but usually there's a lot of indications and it happens slowly. But that's not what was happening here. They were fine one moment and then not the next. And this was always happening to the babies that were under the care of Lucy Letby. Doctors and nurses were not blind to this, so they did notify hospital administration of the suspicious activity, but they were ignored. So a big part of this story is a health system's failure to act against an incredibly serious accusation to prevent the additional and unnecessary injury of babies. And the things she did were so sadistic. Lucy Letby's MO would be to give her tiny patients excess milk, insulin, fluid, or to inject air into their bloodstreams. And she would argue with coworkers if they saw the babies in distress, and she'd even convince parents to put their trust in her that she knew better. There was an instance of a parent of a triplet pulling their child because it was an obvious distress, and the child made a miraculous recovery. It wasn't until the police were notified that they started following up on these charges. She was arrested 3 times, but was let go the first 2 times, and was finally charged in 2020. Lucy Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 infants. She faced a total of 22 charges related to those deaths, and as well as 10 additional attempted murder charges. And some of the babies that survived require round-the-clock care because of their injuries. Now, I cannot impress enough how terrible this woman is. Not only did she refuse everything during the trial, but she just refused to show up for her sentencing and wouldn't listen to the victim impact statements. The Prime Minister even condemned her for that. She was given a life sentence, she will never be released, and honestly, good riddance.